Hello, everyone, and welcome. We are so glad that you are here. I hope everyone can see and hear me. If you can see and hear me, please give me a thumbs up. Welcome from Zimbabwe. Oh, I love this. Cameroon, Belize, Nigeria. This is so exciting. I am very happy to be here. I am your moderator, Dr. Phyllisa Deroze, member of the IDF Blue Circle Voice and host of the IDF podcast D-Talk. Also the founder of Black Diabetic Info from the United States, but I'm currently in Martinique. I want to say this is an important session. We are glad you're here. This webinar will be recorded. You can activate the Zoom generated subtitles. We see you talking in the chat. The recording and the slide feedback questionnaire will be sent to everyone who has registered via email in a few days. And we do ask that you fill that out so that we know if we want to do this again. Participants who attend at least 80% of this event live will receive an attendance certificate if they complete the feedback questionnaire. So make sure you do that. Please check your spam folders if you haven't received it by March 21st. Please use the Q&A function to post your questions to the panelists. Okay, we are setting the scene for this wonderful talk on women with diabetes. Our opening remarks will be presented by Dr. Hermelinda Pedrosa. She's the IDF Vice President Physician, the chair of the IDF Committee on Women and Diabetes and endocrinologist, and she is from Brazil. Please welcome Dr. Pedrosa.
Well, thank you very much, Phyllisa. It's a pleasure to see you and everyone here. Also, I'm very pleased to be invited once again to participate in this Blue Circle Talk, which is a very, very good activity of IDF. I am, as Phyllisa said, Hermelinda Pedrosa from Brazil. I'm an endocrinologist. I have been very active in our country with the Brazilian Diabetes Society, which I have the honor to be its last past president. And now I also have this honor to be the chair of the Women Diabetes Committee, which was set up by our late president, Professor Akita Hussein, in Cairo, Egypt. We have very important members, Ana Fernanda Sanchez from Ecuador, Irina Vlasenko, Ukraine, and Mrs. Jack Malouf from Lebanon. Please, next one. We know that there is still a poor attendance to screenings after diagnosis of gestational diabetes. And perhaps we could ask, does this scenario contribute to an underestimated figure? I would say much probably. And also I would like to ask, what can be done to circumvent this? From this very interesting slide that I got from Professor Marina Schmidt, if we go here to the this line, this arrow one, we have all the phases that all women face from childhood to maturity, which includes postmenopause. And this turns in many metabolic and physiological, pathophysiological scenarios. And perhaps we could mention some of the facts that we have here in this last part, which involve the postpartum, which is a very good opportunity to screen diabetes and also to implement prevention. And I just found a very interesting, but also important and severe data that I'm going to show in the next slide about the breastfeeding. One of the approaches that we could improve adherence to diabetes screening comes from very important lessons from our very good country, India, which is a very active in diabetes as well. And I would say that the use of artificial intelligence needs to be spread out because it's a way of disseminating knowledge. So they have this very important work through health apps and use of mHealth and virtual visits, which increased about nearly 96% increase in terms of screening in postpartum diabetes in that country. Also, another very nice data come from these Wings mHealth apps, which means to use mobile health apps for smartphones. So these are very useful tools that could be used perhaps worldwide, and even those countries which do not have these facilities, we can try to make some policies in the future to make that easier for them. Next, please. So another very important, as I just said, about this breastfeeding data comes from this very important study that involved over 15,000 type 2 women and over 4,500 women with gestational diabetes. As you can see, when these women had longer duration of breastfeed, which means 1.5 years versus 0 month, we can see here among type 2 women that they had a 32% lower risk of cardiovascular disease and also 38% lower risk of coronary heart disease, which is something very important because women are still neglected to be either screened or treated. And towards gestational diabetes, as you can see, the risk is even more reduced when they do breastfeeding. So 51% for CVD and 62% for coronary disease. So these are very important news that we really need to spread out. Next, please. And we know that women have a higher risk of heart disease and, of course, other diabetes complications. Concerning heart failure, which is an issue that is really on the stage in these recent years, when we look at this very important data that comes from a biobank in the UK, type 1 diabetes women had 88% higher risk compared to men with type 1 diabetes. And on the scenario of type 2 diabetes, women 17% higher compared to men. So we really see again another important scenario using very important and large data that we really have to get all the healthcare professionals, especially people living with diabetes, and especially women, that we have to do something about this very important scenario. Next, please. Some of the reasons, of course, I don't have time to go through everything, but I quoted these two important reasons that perhaps can explain why women have a higher risk of heart disease and other diabetes complications. It seems that the effect of diabetes in the heart function is very different in women compared to men, and this goes especially with type 1 diabetes women. And also hormonal change also play a very important role. So we have to study these facts more, but much data comes from these aspects, and I have to consider and to say that especially women with type 1 diabetes need to be screened, need to be aware about these facts. Next, please. So despite all these things that I have just said, the scenario of poor screening is still a reality and even inadequate medical care. So how can IDF contribute to overcome this? As I said in the beginning, we have this Women Diabetes Committee, and we have a plan. All people who will attend the Congress in Thailand will have this very good World in Diabetes, Women in Diabetes stream that is led by Professor Marina Schmid, and I had the honor to help her to set up the activities. We don't know, but perhaps for the future, and I hope this will be not too long, we have all the infographics, all the data that will be inserted in this call to action women diabetes. Professor Chantal Mathieu, Marina Schmidt, Brazil, Rodica Pop Buzui from the US, Paraskevi Salpi from IDF, and of course, we are going to have our members of the Women Diabetes Committee, plus the ASD and ADA and IDF staff. In this aspect, I would like to mention Phil Riley, Sami Patan from IDF, Manuela Meirelles and Manja Deparade from ASD, and we have to get someone still from ADA, which probably will be defined by Professor Rodica Pop Busoy. They all be there in Thailand to work for this important activity. Next, please. And of course, I'm not going through all these details, but I invite you to go and see this Women Diabetes activity. And the title is Why Are Relevant Aspects of Care Still Neglected Among Women? This is a very important issue that Blue Circle Talk bring to the stage, and we really have to reflect and do some policies to circumvent this reality. Next, please. And this is I'm doing sort of spoiler, but probably this will be the cover of the diabetes report, Women Diabetes. You see that there are some men as well here, because we're not intended to separate ourselves and all the women with diabetes apart from men, but we have to think in terms of how this work can really do an impact, and we're just searching for budget to launch this pretty soon. Next, please. So I ended this with this message that I would like to send to you, and I am here for the whole meeting, and I'll be available if any questions come to this aspect. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Pedrosa, for that. I have to say, I took down some notes when you gave that startling statistic about 88% of women with T1D and 17% of women with T2D have higher chance of heart disease than men. I've definitely put that on my list of things to do for this year to get checked. If we could just go back a slide, I do want to make an announcement. Yes, thank you very much. For the Diabetes Voice, if you have your phone out and you can scan those QR codes, these are documents that help further the education that we're talking about in this webinar today. Diabetes Voice, Unveiling Disparities, Women Diabetes, and Inspiring Inclusion. And then also, as I mentioned before, I'm the host of D-Talk. We did an episode on diabetes and pregnancy that you do not want to miss. So go ahead and scan those QR codes. Now, continuing on, I am going to bring up and introduce 4 fabulous panelists. Our panelist from IDF Blue Circle Voice, Anita Sabidi. She's the program manager, Women in Diabetes, hailing from Indonesia. Dawn Adams, IDF Blue Circle Voice, Menopause Mothers Peer Support Network, hailing from the UK. Heather Koga, the IDF Blue Circle Voice, hailing from Zimbabwe. And bringing in the rear, Kirsten de Klerk, IDF Young Leader in Diabetes, co-founder and chairperson of the SA Diabetes Advocacy, hailing from South Africa. So I'm going to let these 4 women come in and speak to you. And I do want to say, keep telling us where you're from in the chat. I'm seeing Haiti, India, Portugal. Welcome to our panelists. We're almost there. Yes, they are coming in. How is everyone?
Good.
Great. It's so good to have everyone on today. So we're going to start off by asking some questions. There have been questions in the chat and some that we have already. I think that you women represent such miles of knowledge when it comes to women and diabetes, and we're here to learn from you and to share. We had one issue with two of our panelists being able to unmute, but just give us a second. There's always technical difficulties, and COVID has taught us to be patient with all of them. Okay. Thank you. So to begin, if we could just go around the room and each of you briefly share with us, how did your interest in women and diabetes come about? We can start with you, Anita, and just go around, just briefly share with the audience.
Okay. Hi, everyone. I'm Anita Sabidi from Jakarta, Indonesia. I live with type 1 diabetes for the last 27 years. So it's been quite a process from childhood to womanhood. And as you know, Indonesia is a very cultural country. We have 70,000 islands with 38 provinces. So if you ask about healthcare access, it's challenging, of course. And in terms of culture, it'll be more challenging. Why? Because we have layers of stigma as a woman and stigma as a woman with diabetes. And the reason why I advocate for women in diabetes in Indonesia is because I want my hardship ends in me and provide a better situation for women with diabetes in the country. Yeah.
Great. I guess I will go next. My name is Kirsten de Klerk from Cape Town, South Africa. I've been living with type 1 diabetes for the last 14 years. And I really think my interest in women with diabetes is, first of all, it's because I am a woman living with diabetes. And for a long time in my personal journey, I was not connected to community at all. I did not know anyone else living with diabetes. And it really, unfortunately, led to me experiencing diabetes burnout and diabetes denial. And only quite a bit later in my early 20s was I introduced to this world of incredible, empowering women who are in all different life cycles and different stages of life. And I think through the power of sharing all of our stories, and I mean, I've met Heather in person, Dawn in person, and it's just been incredible to hear, you know, how different life can look for people living with diabetes, whether you're a woman in a different country, and how different that access looks like. But I think unless we share our stories, we'll never know what is to come in the future for us living with diabetes as women, and what access can look like if we know what other countries have available to them. Thank you.
Yeah, and I'm Dawn Adams. I live in the UK. I live in Northern Ireland, which is way up in the northwest of the UK. I've had type 1 diabetes now for 32 years, which has seen me through all of my reproductive years and beyond. I've had 4 successful pregnancies with type 1 diabetes. And I have recently completed my journey into postmenopausal life. So that has been quite a challenge in terms of trying to find support from healthcare providers. It's been quite a challenge trying to find research support from academics. And as a result of that, I've been working with other women within the community, Heather and Anita in particular, and many others who are on the call today, to try and make our voices as women living with diabetes heard. And that has also included women who have transitioned to being men with diabetes, who have faced equal challenges because they've been going through surgical or chemical menopauses.
My name is Heather Koga. I'm from Zimbabwe, and I've had type 2 diabetes for almost 12 years now. And obviously my interest is firstly because I'm a woman, And I've also experienced some of the challenges that we experience as women, biologically and socially as well. My first diagnosis was actually a gestational diabetes diagnosis. And it was actually at the very end of my pregnancy, like the very final weeks. So I encountered difficulties and challenges there. And now I belong to a very vibrant community of people with diabetes, including women who come to me with their stories, who look up to me for support and for sharing knowledge and resources. And the community that I come from is actually, to me, diabetes is gendered, because as women, we carry the burden, not only for ourselves, but also for the family members with and without diabetes. So that is why, for me, connecting with other women is very important, and furthering my knowledge on how to manage diabetes as a woman is important.
Thank you so much for the work that you all are doing. I want to take this time to ask for just a bit of clarification. Many of you talked about challenges that you experienced. If we could actually kind of unpack that. So if you could take a moment and think about maybe the biggest challenge or one or two, because we're going to go around through all the panelists. So when you think about the challenges from being a girl to a woman, menopause, post-menopause, these things, can you just like unpack challenge for us and tell us like maybe something specific that you'd like to share with our audience so that when we say challenges, they have an idea of what you mean? We'll go ahead and start with you, Anita.
Okay, do you mind if I explain in phases? Is it okay?
Yes.
because growing up with diabetes from childhood to womanhood, it's very challenging, especially in Indonesia. As a child, I know that I feel isolated because I have my own routine, finger pricks, insulin injection, dietary restrictions, and I do feel different among my friends. And when I grew up, that's where the menstruation hits, where the hormonal changes influence my blood sugar. But not everyone understand about it. So the blame came and they thought that I must have eaten something. But actually it's not, it's because of my hormonal changes. And you can imagine me as a teenage having my menstruation cycle, blood sugar fluctuation, menstrual cramp, and then got blamed. It's really frustrating. And I think I have this discussion earlier with Dawn that we do encourage girls with diabetes when they get their first period to have psychological assistance. Why? Because sometimes it's just too much to handle. I mean, having all the chaos in our menstruation cycle. And then as a young adult going to a workplace, it will be another challenge because I'm a woman and then I have diabetes. It's like tell or not to tell, because if I tell my employer that I have diabetes, they will, I know some countries have discrimination act, but not in my country. We don't have that. So I don't tell anyone about it. So I inject my insulin, I treat my hypo in the bathroom. And it took some years to convince my employer that I have the same competence, even though I have diabetes. So it takes a process. And probably the most difficult is about relationship, tell or not to tell our future husband about our condition. Because as a woman in a cultural society, they expect us to be a caregiver, to be a nurturer, and they see diabetes as a flaw. They fear that we cannot fulfill their expectation as a woman in terms of being a caregiver, having kids, being a good mother, being a good wife. So it's like layers of pressure for us as women with diabetes. So so that's why one of my program in Indonesia like to empower women with diabetes. Why? Because despite all the pressure, you are important, you are valuable. I mean, prioritize yourself. You're important.
Thank you so much for that. So I now have a better understanding of what you mean by challenges, and I hope our listening viewers do too. The next question I have is for Christian and Heather. What advice would you give to young women diagnosed with diabetes who are just starting their journey? We can start with you, Heather, if you could go first, and then Christian.
Okay, thank you. So the first thing that I would want anyone who has just been diagnosed is for them to know that you are not alone. There is a huge community out there. There are many people who have faced what you are facing. I know at first when you get a diagnosis, you are overwhelmed. You don't have any information. You don't know what it means to have diabetes. So you can be quite overwhelmed. You can be confused. You don't know what the next step to take is. But just know that you are not alone. Others have experienced it before you, and you can make it. So go out there, be part of a community. Don't be afraid to seek support. There are many people out there who are willing to give you that kind of support. Do it step by step. Rome was not built in a day, so you're not going to be a success overnight, but step by step, bit by bit, you are going to make it.
Thank you. And Christian?
Yeah, I think Heather, that was a wonderful response. And I think I'll just add to that, you know, often you might feel that your healthcare team might not be listening, or they might not understand what you're trying to explain. And it can be really difficult, especially if you're just being diagnosed, to really stand up for yourself and advocate for yourself in that space. But if you feel that your healthcare team or someone on your healthcare team is not supporting you in the way that you feel you need to be supported, it's very important to remove yourself from that situation. Find other people that you can add to your healthcare team. Speak to members in the community. Ask them for referrals to specialists if you find that the one that you're currently dealing with is not supporting you in the way that you feel you need. And then the second thing I would add is that it's really important to find other women living with diabetes that are in different life stages. So yes, it's really lovely to have friends that are your own age living with diabetes, because you're able to talk about your life stage. But to have friends living with diabetes that come from different backgrounds, that are different ages, have access to different things, it really helps to kind of broaden your perspective on what it really means to be a woman with diabetes as a whole, like in the whole world. And it really widens your perspective. And it, as Heather said, it really gives you the support that you might need at some point in the future, to know that, oh, Dawn once spoke about menopause and diabetes. She could be a great contact to get into a connection with, and she might be able to help. And we kind of connect and we network, because the resources, as Dawn was saying earlier, just really aren't there in many countries in the world. And it really is up to us to connect globally to start sharing those resources as people living with diabetes.
Thank you both for that great advice, empowering messages, and also reaching outside of your age circle. Those things are very important. And as we talk about reaching outside of our age circle, Dawn, you share with the audience that you are postmenopausal at this point, so you have gone through so much. Would you be able to share with us what the interplay is between reproductive hormones and diabetes?
Absolutely. Where I was diagnosed at the age of 22, up until the point of diagnosis, I'd had very regular menstrual cycles. Type 1 came into my life, and routine, habits, pattern went straight out the window. I think, as we all know, living with type 1 diabetes, and as people living with type 2 diabetes as well, I found I was really unfortunate in that my diabetes review clinics were always the Saturday before I was due to menstruate. And I went in, and my readings had been perfect for 3 weeks. And I went in with the previous week's readings, which were in the high teens, low 20s. At that point in time, I was on much older insulins. I was on very set doses by the hospital. And my consultant just used to throw their hands up in horror and say, is it coming to this clinic, you think, that might be causing this this wildly erratic blood glucose? And I was like, I don't know what's causing it. And all I could think was, please, please, please move my clinic to the week after my period. This is just not good. And I'm too embarrassed to have this conversation with you. And I don't know what I can fix to change this. And as I then went into that post-ovulation or that post-period week, fantastic blood glucose levels. They were textbook perfect. They were everything that I was hoping for. And I found, talking to other females of younger ages, coming from the age of 13 upwards, who are saying they're having exactly those same conversations, those same issues with erratic blood glucose in the run up to a period. Friends have shared their glucose readings on social media platforms, and they've gone, I don't know what's going on. I've just messaged them quietly on the side and said, would you be any way likely to be having a period in the next 3 to 5 days? And they've all sent back yes. And they're like, how did you know? Going, I've lived with this for more than 3 decades. This is what we do. But making that connection can be so challenging in itself. And Anita's already talked about a lot of the challenges that we face. Admitting that that's the thing that's caused the erratic glucose levels and made you so insulin resistant is another thing that we've faced. We know, we've all been to school, we all know that progesterone and estrogen are the primary female hormones. Anyone who's been through a pregnancy knows that in the final trimester of a pregnancy, progesterone levels just increase to keep that pregnancy maintained and to keep keeping everything going until the birth. And we know that's when gestational diabetes in particular is picked up. We know if we take insulin or if we have type 2 and we've been on diet only, that's whenever additional medications are needing to be added in. That's whenever those doses of the medications are significantly increasing. As I said, I've had 4 pregnancies. My first pregnancy, my pre-pregnancy doses of insulin were 4 units, 4 units, 4 units, and 12 units. By the end of that pregnancy, by week 35, which is when a lot of women are picked up with gestational diabetes, my insulin requirements were sitting at 64, 72, 72, and 68. Which was a massive, massive rise. Within 24 hours of having had the baby, I was on 2 units of insulin, 2 units of insulin, 2 units of insulin, 8 units of insulin. So I'd gone back because the estrogen levels were then higher to help facilitate breastfeeding. And going through perimenopause, again, that inability, I felt like it was an inability in my own part to be able to maintain any level of glucose stability, regardless of physical activity, regardless of sleep, which was very disturbed in that hot flushes phase and in the confusion, panic, everything that comes with perimenopause, and diet readjustments as well. It didn't seem to matter what I did, the cards just felt like they were stacked against me on every front. And again, that's been to do with the changes in estrogen and progesterone levels, where insulin resistance has become an issue again. I've been very fortunate in that my family doctor listened to me and did prescribe me hormone replacement therapy or menopause hormone therapy. And because I'm on set doses of estrogen, because I'm on set doses of progesterone, there's no fluctuation from one day to the next. It's the same dose continually. The stability in glucose levels that I had worked so hard for almost 30 years has become much less of an obstacle course for me. Things that I'm doing, I can now look at and go, this is okay. I've managed to actually find the cure for a lot of the questions that I didn't have answers to. And I was at a talk on Wednesday night locally from a family doctor who specializes in menopause, not in diabetes at all, But she was saying that she can't understand why people are so reluctant to prescribe menopause hormone therapy. Because if we have diabetes, people aren't reluctant to prescribe insulin. If we have thyroid issues, they aren't reluctant to prescribe thyroid medications. If we have cystic fibrosis, which is another hormone condition, people aren't resistant to prescribing medication for that condition as well. And it made my heart sing. I just thought, this is amazing. She's speaking the words that I need to hear right now, and that I think so many of us globally need to hear. And I think when we look at the benefits of estrogen and progesterone, the protective factors that they have for cardiac health and for cognitive health, it seems obtuse of medical practitioners to not consider those as prophylactic medications for preserving well-being once we hit this post-menopause phase of our lives.
Thank you so much, Dawn, for just a wealth of knowledge. I certainly have a lot of notes there. I'm going to make sure that I look into that when that time comes. And like Christian had said earlier, it's important to talk to people at different phases of their life, especially when it comes to dealing with hormonal changes and diabetes. I have an announcement to make. We have reached the 600 attendee mark. Isn't that so exciting? I am thrilled. Keep telling us where you're from. I'm loving what I'm seeing. Tunisia, Cameroon. This is absolutely amazing. I want to transition now to a question that came in the chat. It's about pregnancy. And one of the questions asked, did you plan your pregnancy? As a person living with diabetes, I can tell you that I definitely planned my pregnancy. I only have one daughter, but I have to say I was so terrified by what I was reading about women and diabetes and pregnancy that I was just like, okay, I can't go into this blindly. And so, yes, my daughter was planned, and that is my story. But I do want to hear from Anita and Christian about your experiences with pregnancy. What was your experience during diagnosis and how the topic of pregnancy was discussed with your healthcare providers?
Who goes first? Can I go first? Okay, so actually, I experienced 4 times pregnancy. I am a mother of 2 boys, but I experienced a miscarriage twice. But a lesson learned is that make your team. So during my pregnancy, I make my medical team. It consists of my endocrinologist, my obgyn, my cardiologist, and all of my health conditions. Why? Because it will ease the insulin adjustment, the medication adjustment during your pregnancy. Because just like Dawn said, in my 3rd semester of pregnancy, I need to raise my insulin dosage doubled because I experienced insulin resistance in my 3rd semester of pregnancy. And by having my endocrinologist and obgyn in the same hospital, it is their communication on how they could adjust my medication during my pregnancy. So make your medical team.
Thank you. I'll add to that. I think, yeah, I was diagnosed at the age of 16 years old. I've not had any children of my own, and I haven't planned any pregnancies so far. But I think the fear was certainly instilled in me from the age of 16 that if I ever wanted to plan a family, it was going to be this very daunting and scary experience, and it was going to be, maybe I was going to be on bed rest for some of the time, and my glucose levels would have to be perfect, and I like everything, and it just seems so daunting even now. Like I think about it and I just go, oh, maybe it's not for me, because it just sounds like the most scary thing in the world. And I really, my hat goes off to all these women living with diabetes who have gone through this experience and just gone through it and have the most wonderful little family units, and they've faced that fear that I think we've all kind of had to face at some point in our lives that has come up. And I remember at the age of 16 getting diagnosed, one of the first things was that if I ever wanted to have a family of my own, it would have to really be planned. And because of that fear that was instilled, I went to my best friend 2 weeks later and I said to her, if I ever want to have kids one day, it's going to be really scary. And she actually offered that she would be my surrogate. So it literally, like, that's the story and the sort of like fear that gets instilled in you, that it was an option that maybe my friend could be my surrogate for me so that I didn't have to put my body under that pressure. And I recall in my early 20s, someone saying to me that I should watch this movie called Sweet Magnolias. And I don't know if any of you have watched it, but it's with Julia Roberts. And I honestly have never watched the end of that movie because it really broke my heart. Because the whole movie, I'm not going to give away the whole plot, but basically it's a woman living with type 1 diabetes, and her healthcare team tells her not to have a child. And she goes ahead and has a child in any event. But it is literally, I get shivers just thinking about that film. And I think it was based in the 1980s, 1990s, around that sort of time. And it just reignited that fear that having a child might not be an option for me. And it's been a really difficult thing to think about. And I know that so many of my wonderful friends have had planned and unplanned pregnancies with type 1 diabetes, and they've produced really healthy, lovely children. And I think times are changing. We're sharing our stories. I'm definitely opening up to the idea of potentially having my own family one day. But the other side of it is how other people perceive you. So it's not just your doctor and your healthcare team, but it's family members or friends that will ask, would you have children, knowing that you have diabetes and that your child could get diabetes? So it's kind of also the stigma and perceptions from other people about the potential harm that you could cause, the genetic or the gene that would continue if you had your own family. So yeah, that's my perspective. At the moment, I'm still terrified of thinking about having a family.
Thank you so much for sharing. For me, I would love to see the space of women with diabetes and pregnancy be open totally to whatever the woman decides. There are women who decide, I don't want to have children, and that should be okay. And there are women who decide, I'm going to have children and I'm going to have as many as possible, and that should be okay too. I feel like our society just doesn't allow oftentimes for the openness of a woman to decide whatever she wants to do. And so I just kind of want to throw that out there, that that choice should be hers and she shouldn't be scared away from it if that's really her desire. Now we're going to move a little bit into strategies and recommendations. Heather, this question is for you. What strategies would you recommend for women to balance work and family and self-care, all while managing diabetes?
Yes, definitely with diabetes, life can become very, very, it can become a lot of pressures on you as a woman, very overwhelming. So you have work, you have to take care of your diabetes and other things. You have a family. And coming from a culture that I come from, actually in my culture, we have a saying which loosely translates to home is a woman. So you're saying when you say home, you are literally, it's synonymous with saying you're a woman. So a woman is in charge of everything, and all the burdens are on your shoulders as a woman. So you just have to find a balance. And there are several strategies that you can employ. I think you can plan your life, set up your priorities, have a plan, daily plan, have a weekly plan, have a monthly plan according to your priorities. You put the important stuff first and then the not so important stuff later, so that you make sure that you take care of all the important things and you don't run out of time. And then be kind to yourself. If you can't do it all in one day, be kind to yourself. Make sure you get some time to rest. Make sure you get some time to rejuvenate. You need to also have time to refresh, take care of your hobbies. And then for your diabetes management, you should also have a personalized plan that you can make with maybe your healthcare providers. You make sure that you try by all means to stick to that plan. And when you can't do it, don't be too hard to yourself. If you can't do it all perfectly, don't be too hard-pressed for perfection. Take it one step at a time. You fall, you rise, you dust yourself up. Tomorrow, you will do it. So be kind to yourself. Take care of yourself. Don't succumb too much to societal pressure. I know there's a lot of pressure in our society of us wanting to be viewed maybe as the superwomen or the superheroes. You're a woman and you want to show everyone that I can do this. I can be in charge of everything. I can be in charge of my family and everything. There is no crown for that. If you have diabetes, you just have to take care of yourself so that you are at your best. If you are not at your best, there's no way that you are going to be able to give your best to your family, your best to your work responsibilities. If you're an empty cup, how are you going to pour out to the others? So in a nutshell, I'm just saying, take good care of yourself. Don't be too hard to yourself. Forgive yourself. There's always more time to do what you have to do.
Thank you so much for that, Heather. I mean, I need to have that part just like in a video memo that I can play in the morning when I wake up. There is no crown for that. I absolutely love that. Uh, Earlier we were talking about things that terrified us with pregnancy. For me, I thought, what happens when I have a moment of hypoglycemia and my baby needs me? Like, who's the priority, right? Like, this was on my mind. Now I know I'm the priority. I have to take care of this hypo, right? So thank you so much, Heather, for those positive words. There is no crown for that. I love it. And home is a woman. My next question for you, Don, is I sat here and I thought about what you were talking about in terms of menopause and the journey. We want to know, what are the top 3 challenges faced by women with diabetes during their menopause journey?
I think from the community that I work very closely with, and it's a properly global community, it's everything from very heterosexual to non-binary to trans community. The big issues are identifying what are hormonal changes and what are physiological changes, because there is such an overlap between the symptoms of perimenopause. I don't know if people are familiar with Green's climacteric scale, but it's a way of assessing where you are in your menopause journey. And many of the factors that are listed on that scale are things which we live, as people who live with diabetes, face on a very regular basis. Hot sweats because of hyperglycemia, confusion because of hyperglycemia, fatigue and tiredness because of hypoglycemia, trying to earn the crown that Heather's talked about, trying to do all of the things that we do. It's the anxiety, the worry, the panic that you have whenever your hormones change. It has such a whole person effect, systemic. It's not just ovaries and uterus that are affected. It's brain, it's cardiac health. It's those chest palpitations. When I saw the first speaker had said about heart health in people with diabetes. You feel the palpitations and you think, am I having the stroke? Am I having the heart attack that I was told I was going to have my first week of diagnosis? Is this my time? It's not. It's the hormonal changes that are going on. And it's trying to find that way through, I think. But I'm very, very fortunate. I know that because I have CGM. And I'm able to check my phone. I'm able to check with a finger prick glucose if I'm not convinced that what my phone is telling me is what I actually am. But trying to separate out the diabetes, because we put the responsibility for diabetes onto absolutely everything else. I was saying to a friend from the UK yesterday, if I had been on the Titanic whenever it sank, I think my diabetes would have been the cause of the Titanic sinking and not the iceberg. I think people tend to look at things as anything that happens to you is the result of your diabetes. It's not the result of other circumstances. So the symptoms were a massive thing to work through. Another thing that I found was really helpful was having a global peer support network of all races, all skin colors, living in very different healthcare systems with access to very different resources. Because whenever we pared it right down to the core things that mattered, it didn't matter where you lived, it didn't matter what your financial status was or wasn't, it didn't matter what your skin color was, it didn't matter how well educated your healthcare providers were or they weren't. None of us were able to get the answers that we had been working so hard. And a lot of what I've shared with you here today has come from that community. It's come from the conversations that we've been having for the last 3 years. So peer support has been had a massive impact on my journey. And I hope that by helping this group to flourish and grow and having open conversations publicly, that it will help others who are facing this phase in life for whatever reason, be it surgical, be it chemical, that we're able to learn, grow and share from each other. And I think being able to then take ownership of that and say, this is what's going on in my life, but this is what I want to do to make it better for me. I've mentioned that I use menopause hormone therapy. There are many other therapies out there. We know that exercise, sleep, increasing fluid intake, changing your diet to include more whole grain foods, which for people in the West is maybe more of a challenge. Stepping away from fast food and stepping more into the space of making food at home.
Right.
Can be a big thing.
Okay, thank you so much, for that. We greatly appreciate that advice. We are going to now turn to a question in the chat. The question in the chat is anyone using CGM and insulin pumps? Have they noticed an improvement specifically in the management of their particular challenges of a woman? I will let Anita answer this, and I will briefly just say I use a CGM and an insulin pump. And what I love about it is I get to do a special profile for that week that Dawn was talking about. My mom always knows the week before I have my cycle because she's getting all kinds of alerts for hypoglycemia. Beep, beep, beep. So with the insulin pump, I have a special profile just for that week. But Anita, can you share with us your experience using a CGM and an insulin pump?
Yep, I'm going to share my experience in my two pregnancies. So in my first pregnancy, I'm using finger pricks and insulin injection. So keep in mind that when you're pregnant, I'm responsible for two lives, myself and the baby. So I finger pricks myself like 9 to 10 times a day. So all of my fingers are bruises because I'm really worried about my baby and myself. And I also do corrections a lot. But when in my second pregnancy, I'm using insulin pump and CGM. The difference as a mother, as a type 1, is the peace of mind that you cannot get when you're doing things manual. I mean, I realized that I'm having a better pregnancy journey with diabetes when I'm using insulin pump and CGM compared when I'm using pricks and insulin injections. Yeah.
Okay, thank you so much. So now, if you notice, our talk is about women's health and also advocacy. So we're going to do just a slight transition to make sure we have time for that piece on advocacy. This question, anyone can go ahead and volunteer to answer. What is the general level of awareness about diabetes among women in your countries? So again, round robin, everyone gets a chance to answer this one. And how can you improve education on managing the condition, maybe for everyone? Can go ahead and answer. I will repeat. What is the general level of awareness among women and diabetes in your country? And how can you improve that education? Let's see, Christian, I don't think you've had a chance to start off yet, so we'll start with you.
Wonderful. So yeah, within a South African context, unfortunately, diabetes is one of the leading causes of death for women. And in terms of people knowing about diabetes and the awareness, I think there's a fear about getting even diagnosed with diabetes. So a lot of people are just relentless or do not reluctant, to actually get tested and know their status of diabetes. So that happens a lot within a South African context in terms of awareness. I think the awareness is very low in terms of testing and prevention. I've always said it would be wonderful if your general or 5-second finger prick test was part of the standard checkup, especially in a South African context where so many people are diagnosed with diabetes. There's probably more people that don't even know that they have diabetes. So I think in terms of awareness, it's very low. As I said, one of the leading causes of death for women in South Africa. It's definitely something that needs to be spoken about more. And I really think very recently community has become such a big aspect of this, and we're really slowly but surely starting to build the lived experience community of living with this condition every day. And through telling our stories and through connecting, we enable others to sort of broach on the topic, find the resources that they need, get tested so that they know if they are living with diabetes or not. I know my friends and family members every November, they know I'm coming to prick their finger. It's just part of the protocol of being my friend or being in my community. And it's something that I definitely stand for, and it's something that I talk about openly. So yeah, definitely a lot needs to be done in terms of awareness of diabetes in South Africa.
Thank you for telling us about your experience in South Africa. Now, if we could turn to Heather for her experience in Zimbabwe.
Thank you. Yeah, I would say it's more or less the same situation in Zimbabwe, where awareness is really at its lowest. And one of the ways in which you can tell is because of the kind of misconceptions that people still have about diabetes, the kinds of myths that are just going around, the beliefs. It's really amazing, some of the things that you get to hear. But for me, well, it's always an opportunity for me to say something, to teach someone. But we really need efforts to be amplified so that we can say in rural areas, but even in urban areas, people really don't know much about diabetes. And I would say maybe I think we need more research about diabetes in general, and also about the needs and concerns of women with diabetes, so that the results of such a research can then inform advocacy efforts. And we need more publications to teach people about diabetes. As it is, we are really at our all-time low in terms of education and awareness.
Thank you. UK, Dawn, can you share with us?
Could you ask the question again? Sorry. I'm so interested in Heather's response there that I completely,
Not a problem. The
overwhelmed.
question is about the general level of awareness in your country, and how do you think we can improve it?
There isn't a huge amount of awareness even across the UK and Ireland about the unique challenges of people who are born female living with type 1, type 2 diabetes, or type 3 diabetes, as we're increasingly having more people entering the community with those conditions as well. I think if we can embed it within routine diabetes education, so that it's something we're made aware of from the point of diagnosis onwards, and then backing that up with support for healthcare professionals, so that if we're reluctant to have the conversation with them, they can open the conversations with us. In terms of the advocacy work that I have done, I've been very fortunate. I've worked with the charity Diabetes UK, and I've also worked with JDRF before they transitioned to Breakthrough Type 1 Diabetes, to produce website information and resources for women with diabetes going through pregnancy, going through menstruation, going through menopause. Again, I think for all of us, taking the opportunities to become available to speak about it. And whenever we have meetups with other people with diabetes, not being afraid to have the conversations. We're not as uncomfortable talking about our food requirements or our insulin requirements as we are about our reproductive health. Bizarrely, with this community, basically everything is on the table apart from reproductive health. And I think that's something that within the community we could start reaching out to each other and providing support or signposting people to others within the community who they may feel more comfortable talking to.
Okay, thank you. And can you share with us an experience in Indonesia, Anita?
Well, it's pretty low, especially, I mean, in general, diabetes awareness is low in Indonesia. But we try our best to raise the awareness. And it's part of the advocacy. I mean, I'm the program manager for women with diabetes in Indonesia. So we conducted we call it Perempuan Wheelchair Diabetes Program or Diabetes Ladies Talk. So it's a workshop conducted with all female endocrinologists, collaborating with female medical students, with participants from all women with diabetes. So it's real specific for women. And the discussion is about menstruation, sexual dysfunction, pregnancy, fertility, and menopause. So as I mentioned before, Indonesia consists of 38 provinces. So this year we're coming into our 15 provinces. So we started the last 2 years, each year 5 provinces. So we're crossing countries. We're crossing countries. And what I'm really happy is that we're providing a safe zone for our women with diabetes. They know that in their province, there are female endocrinologists that they can ask questions. They will have female medical students that they can, I mean, just a small health chat. And after workshop itself, they develop a WhatsApp group so they can communicate and support each other.
Well, thank you so much, and congratulations. And you have to come back and tell us when you hit all the provinces, because we are going to have a party for you and your advocacy. As you all have shared, I think everywhere it seems to be like a low awareness, so there's always space for diabetes advocacy. Because even in the US, where I think perhaps people know the word diabetes, sometimes the understanding of exactly what that means is not where it should be. I do want to say for everyone who is in our audience, again, over 600 people, we are so glad to have you at your various times of the day or night. You all are very active and we are trying to get to every question. I don't know if we'll get to every question in the chat, but just know that we see the questions and we're doing our best. And to help try to answer these questions, I'm going to throw out 2 questions at one time to our panelists. So the first question is about stigma. How does stigma and discrimination affect the mental well-being of women living with diabetes? So that's question 1. Anyone want to talk about stigma and discrimination against women? The other one is from our chat, and it's about eating disorders. Someone is asking, what is your take on women with diabetes and eating disorders? So again, I'm going to throw those 2 out there at the same time. Try to pick one. Stigma, well-being, eating disorders. Again, women with diabetes.
I'll go with stigma.
Okay, thank you. That's what I like. Go ahead, Anita.
Okay, I would like to highlight the stigma on pregnancy because I've been through that, and it's frustrating. First, because people thought that I cannot have kids, and when I got pregnant, people expect me to deliver naturally, to become a real mother, but which I didn't because I have a C-section, and then they labeled me as I'm not a perfect mother. I'm not a real mother. And then I cannot breastfeed my kids because I got into major hypo whenever I breastfeed my kids. So, and then they labeled me either I'm not being a good mother for my kids. And also during family events, whenever I get a hypo, they label me as I'm not being a good mother. So what I think is that you're being a good mother is when you try your best to stay alive with your kids as long as possible. And that's what matters most. So you don't have to hear all the buzzing words of society. Just focus on yourself, because the greatest present for your kids is you being alive. I love you, Phyllisa. I know you have a daughter.
Yes, yes. I was going to say, you are shutting down. I need to go on camera and get a tissue, because you are absolutely right. A good mother is doing the best you can to stay alive for your children. Anyone else want to tackle the stigma or the eating disorders that came from the chat? Thank you, Christian. Go ahead.
I think, yeah, I'd just like to add to what Anita said, but more from being a woman, and like being a woman without diabetes is difficult, and we have many conditions even without diabetes. And I think one of my biggest frustrations has been the stigma around when I go to a doctor with another condition or another symptom that I feel is outside of my diabetes, but it always being blamed on diabetes. And instead of helping me find the root cause of the issue, it's always just, oh, but you have diabetes, so that's quite common. And now I must just live with higher glucose levels at this point, or with an infection because of this. And it's really frustrating, because I believe that my glucose levels are very well managed. I do the best that I can, and there's often times that I feel like there's something outside of my diabetes that is impacting my body, but it's just always kind of just thrown on like in the same basket as diabetes, and that can be very frustrating. So I think from the stigma point of view, definitely. And then in terms of eating disorders and diabetes specifically, and I think I can bring in diabetes technology to this as well, and around the mental load of having data over consumption. Most people these days are tracking something, whether it's their steps or their sleep patterns or whatever it is, but people with diabetes that have access to CGM technology or to different technologies that help you with your diabetes management, you are so overwhelmed with numbers and numbers and numbers every single day, that the mental load and the capacity to have periods of diabetes burnout is very high. And I know through consultations with my own psychologist, who happens to live with type 1 diabetes as well, he has mentioned that the rates are very high for women living with type 1 diabetes to have some form of eating disorder, and the rates are a lot higher for those living with type 1 diabetes who are women, for things like diabulimia, anorexia, binge eating disorders, because of the impact on our glucose levels, and constantly having to fixate on food and how we eat, and the stigma that comes from other people always commenting on, are you allowed to eat that? Should you be eating that? So a lot of eating in private. If like my parents always used to have this rule growing up in the house, that if I was in the kitchen, I had to whistle, because if I was whistling, then they knew I wasn't eating any of the food that I shouldn't have been eating. So it's really around all of that stigma around other people constantly watching what you're eating, that can really develop into eating disorders throughout your lifetime living with diabetes.
Thank you so
I would like
much.
to talk about stigma in the workplace. I think this is really something that is real, where there's a lot of misconception, and people can actually face a lot of unfair treatment at work, because there's misconception about their capabilities, what they're able to do, and also their need for some of those accommodations to make their work easier as people with diabetes. So I've been lucky. I think I've actually brought my advocacy to my workplace, and over time, they've actually gotten to understand what I need, and they've actually made some adjustments to my work, which has made my work easier, as well as giving me a better chance to take care of my. But not everyone that I speak to has been that lucky as I am. And I've heard a lot of sad stories about people actually being excluded from certain roles, and actually being passed over for maybe promotion or other opportunities at the workplace. So it's really terrible. And in such cases, it only leads to mental health issues for people with diabetes instead of making it easier for them. So in the workplace, and then maybe I can also briefly say something about medical insurance as well. I've heard about situations where you are not allowed, or you cannot apply for a certain type of medical insurance because of your pre-existing conditions, of which diabetes is one of them. Or maybe the premiums are actually made to be higher for people with pre-existing conditions like diabetes, and that really affects access to treatment and better health for people with diabetes.
Yeah.
Thank you. Dawn, would you like to chime in on either one? Go ahead.
Yeah, actually a wee bit of both. So there is so much stigma around diabetes amongst people who are aware of it, that it's something that people impose upon themselves because of poor choices with food, activity, lifestyle. We know, every one of us who lives with diabetes knows that that is not a thing. And I think that feeds into part of the body image, the disordered food eating. Because whenever I was diagnosed, I weighed just over 30 kilos, which is not normal for a 22-year-old female, but that was what I weighed. And as I was putting weight on, because I now had insulin to help my body to work properly, I got to a certain size in clothes and a certain weight on the scales. I didn't want to go past that weight. And I skipped insulin doses, I skipped food because of the shame and the stigma that, oh, I'd now put all the weight back on again. And I never weighed much more than about 55 kilos prior to diagnosis. But once I reached 55 kilos again, I really struggled to allow myself to be 56 kilos. And yeah, menopause then hit, and everything that I did and say just went out the window. So I'm quite happy in the body that I now inhabit, because the insulin that keeps me alive is the reason why I am the weight that I am, the dress size that I am. And I think if we could pull back on the shame and the stigma, it might help to ease some of that issue around the food. I think we could break down the wrong belief at a societal level that diabetes is caused by body mass index and not totally separate from it. Because we don't look at people who have other hormone conditions, as I talked about at the start. We don't look at people with thyroid conditions. We don't look at people with celiac disease or with cystic fibrosis. And we don't judge them for their weight. We don't say, oh, well, you obviously caused that yourself because you didn't run fast enough, you didn't cycle hard enough, you didn't eat enough salad in your life. They're hormonal issues, regardless of the type of diabetes. It's very much a hormonal cause. It's a physiological factor, and there's very little that we can do to impact that or change it one way or the other. All we can do is use the tools that we have to live as well as we can.
Thank you so much for sharing that. I absolutely love the transparency around that. I don't think there is enough conversation about when you are diagnosed with diabetes, you are taught disordered eating. You're taught to look at every single thing that you eat and then to see how that transpires into the amount of insulin. And like you, Dawn, for me at my smallest, since my diagnosis, there have been 2 times that I was significantly smaller. And everybody was like, oh, you look good, girl. You look nice. And I'm thinking, I'm sick. I was in DKA, diabetes ketoacidosis, both of those times. But with our society looking only at, like you said, body mass index and not where you are in terms of your A1C and your health, things get convoluted. Great question from the audience. Again, we're doing our best to get through them as our time is winding down. I'd like to now turn to a question that has come up. This one is for Heather and Kirsten. What are some unique challenges that you have experienced when seeking help with your diabetes management as a woman? You can go ahead, Christian.
Perfect. I just this morning actually I was scrolling on a social feed and I saw Dr. Mark Hyman, who's quite a popular name in the US space, posted about how women were excluded from studies in the US until 1993. And I think that is just it speaks to the question that you asked around when I want to find out more about why certain things are impacting my hormones, or when I want to find out more about contraceptives and type 1 diabetes. There is not much information out there for me to go and do my own research. And I think it's the same for any sort of women-specific diabetes-related issues. There's very little in terms of evidence or research done for us to go and do our own sort of background research, information around, I mean, Dawn, menopause. I haven't even heard that being spoken about in the South African context with diabetes. Similar with gestational diabetes, kind of more around the awareness around the life cycle of being a woman with diabetes, what that looks like, trends that we need to look out for. How can I better equip myself as a person living with diabetes for the future if I do not have access to resources that allow me to? At the moment, pretty much my only resource is either speaking to an HCP or speaking to someone else living with diabetes who has been there and done that. But if I could get some evidence-backed or science-based research on some of my specific queries, that would be really helpful. And then in terms of understanding my hormones and diabetes and why my glucose levels rise or drop in certain times of the month, what I can do to kind of curb those cravings that we get as women at certain times of the month so that they don't fluctuate my glucose levels for a week at a time. And that's at nearly every 3 weeks of our lives. I think that would be super helpful if we had a little bit more in-depth understanding of that. And from an HCP level, especially the endocrinologist that I've been to, it's kind of just like a topic that isn't delved into, and it would really help me in my diabetes management for the rest of my life to understand that cycle and the impact on that cycle.
Thank you. And Heather?
Thank you. I would first want to reiterate the issue about a lack of enough research being done, lack of enough information about the unique needs and concerns of women with diabetes. I think just yesterday I was discussing with another woman. She was saying that the issue of insulin, as soon as she started using insulin, she has been gaining weight. And this is something that I've also experienced. For me, I didn't really gain weight as such, but I have not been able to lose weight since I started using insulin. Before insulin, I was actually steadily losing weight. So we need answers to some of those things, and there is not enough that is there for us to make reference to. And also coming from a low resource setting, issues of affordable and accessibility to diabetes management tools and technology. Diabetes technology, where I come from, the intake is still very low and the knowledge is also still very low. So those are some of the issues that affect women in my communities.
Thank you so much. Our next question is about disparities. Are there disparities in diabetes care for women compared to men? And how can these gaps be addressed to ensure equal treatment and outcomes? Is there any one of our panelists that would like to answer this question? Thank you.
Okay, I'll give you one simple example. Why is sexual dysfunction is more common in discussion for men with diabetes instead of with women with diabetes? That would be one of example. Why? Because as a female, personally, we tend to hide our condition because we know that we have to take care of our family, the house, and so forth. While the men, they are the most of them are the breadwinner, so they have to be very healthy because they need to work and so forth. And when we're going out to the hospital to pursue our medication, sometimes they think that we're overthinking of our condition. So it's very, but yes, but there's a way. The way is educate. That's why we have workshops on raising awareness about diabetes in women, that we have sexual dysfunction issues, we have challenges and so forth. So yeah, how to minimize the gaps is through education.
Thank you so much for that. And there were questions in the chat about women's sexual health. So thank you so much for bringing that topic up. And I definitely agree, there's a lot about men and sexual dysfunction. And then when you are a woman with diabetes and you experience sexual dysfunction, like where do you go? What's the conversation?
No one talk about it.
Exactly. Yes, Christian, go ahead.
I'll just add to that, and I mean, this was just something that came up while Anita was talking, and I'm not sure what everyone else's experience would have been of this, but from my own personal experience, most of my diabetes healthcare team are males. So I think that that's quite interesting in terms of the healthcare space, that women often don't have women to speak to in terms of the different challenges that they might face. And especially when you're a young woman who might not feel comfortable approaching certain topics with older men that might be in the space, I think that could be quite an interesting study to do in terms of the makeup of healthcare teams globally, male versus female, and the options that you have in terms of access.
Yeah, great.
Yeah, thank you for that addition. It is a great topic. And I will share with everyone, because we do like to be specific about those challenges. At diagnosis, I had a chronic yeast infection. That was part of my diagnosis. I didn't know it then. That was a symptom that I had. In addition to that, I also got a lot of UTIs, urinary tract infections, that I needed to share with my gynecologist, and we got on a regimen and those things were cleared up. But had I not been vocal, had it probably been a man, maybe I would not have shared with her. But these things are a part of what some women with diabetes experience in terms of their body, their sexual functions.
Yep.
So thank you for that. Don, I have a question for you. And this question is, when I sit here and I think about it, we've talked a lot about challenges, right? And I want to move on to something more positive. What has been the most effective support for you?
The diabetes community. Bottom line. It's, as I said earlier, it's a safe community to come and ask questions, to share experiences. And I've been very blessed. I've met everybody on the call. I've even listened to lectures of yours, Phyllisa, in the States, in real life. And I personally have benefited so much from sharing stories, sharing experiences, being able to have my voice heard in the space. And because you have the privilege of having your voice heard, it makes you much more receptive to listening to others' stories, not for a comparison, who's doing better, who's doing worse, but because there's something very bonding about that. There's something that is very, very precious, the fact that other people share their experiences with you. So for me personally, that has been the biggest support structure that I have had. Everything else, apart from insulin, if it went tomorrow, I could do without. But the peer support and the insulin are the two things that keep me motivated, that keep me going every day, and that get me through the really difficult times with diabetes, with menopause, with life in general.
Thank you so much for sharing that. As I am looking at the time, I have to say, unfortunately, we are winding down. But I do want to, before we go, ask you two more questions. And one is from our audience. So this one, if everyone can respond in like 20 seconds, so keep it short. If you had to choose one topic of research to help women living with diabetes, what would it be? We'll go in this order: Heather, Don, Christian, Anita.
I would reiterate the issue of insulin therapy in both type 1 and type 2 diabetes.
Yeah, but following on from that, the factors affecting insulin activity, absorption, and use during various phases of the reproductive cycle and into pregnancy, menopause, and at puberty as well.
I think, yeah, mine is pretty similar to Dawn's, but it would definitely be the trends over the life cycle of a woman living with diabetes and kind of what we would need to look out for in terms of the different phases of life of being a woman with type 1 diabetes.
Yep. And mine will be about life phases with diabetes from childhood to womanhood, and specifically on pregnancy, because there's a lot more to explore about pregnancy, because as a woman with diabetes, I would love to have a nice, beautiful journey of my pregnancy instead of stressing it out.
Okay. And for me, it would be postpartum, women with diabetes. I'm definitely looking for that discussion. Okay, so now I turn to a question that I always ask on our podcast. So this question is again for everybody, and I want you to answer as quickly as you can. You did a great job then, so thank you very much. What are your requests for society and for governments for a better future for women with diabetes? And this time we'll go Anita, Kirsten, Dawn, Heather, reverse.
Okay, education, 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 because I firmly believe that this stigma and discrimination is because of our lack of information about it. And by having education, which means that we can empower women with diabetes by providing a safe zone for them.
I feel like there's still a great divide between the lived experience and the healthcare professional space. And I think by enabling lived experience to actually come into the healthcare system and to share our stories, we're able to better connect, we're able to better understand each other and learn from one another's experiences. And I feel that if our government could incorporate that into some form of the healthcare system, I think it would highly improve our ability to function as women with diabetes.
Education and screening. We nearly all have global screening programs for breast cancer, cervical cancer. We don't have global screening for cardiac health, cognitive health, sexual and reproductive health.
Integration. Sorry about that. Integration of mental health support and resources in programs that affect women with diabetes, increased funding for research on the specific needs and challenges of women with diabetes. That would be my request.
Thank you so very much for those answers from each of you. And for me, I would absolutely agree with everything that everyone said. As you know, it is unfortunately our time has come to an end, but I do want to say this. We have had more than 600 people attend. We have had over 70 questions from our audience, great involvement of men in the webinar as well, which shows that women's health is not only of interest to women, but also the entire family. And I also want to mention that the next year, of course, we'll come back with another Blue Circle Talk for International Women's Day. I want to thank everybody for coming out today. The recording and the slides and feedback questionnaire will be sent to everyone within a couple of days. Please respond to the questionnaire so that we can improve these events that we do online and for you to get your certificate of attendance. If you have any questions, you can email at advocacy@idf.org. Thank you so much for tuning in. Have a great day. And remember, we have the IDF World Diabetes Congress. Please scan the code. Why you should attend, because it's phenomenal, because it is the best place to be. So go ahead and scan the code and learn more information about IDF Diabetes Congress happening in Bangkok, Thailand, 7th through the 10th of next month. Thank you again.